The following program presents recreations based on scientific extrapolation. For that reason, some of the incidents depicted are dramatized. But many believe that these incidents could happen on a day known as Doomsday.
We have no defense.
If everyone gets infected, dies.
No one is immune from disaster.
The ends of the Earth could already be here. Doomsday weapons.
We have no system that could take out a long-range ICBM.
Doomsday viruses.
We're talking about upwards of 125 million humans dying from flu.
Go, come on!
Doomsday asteroids.
There's nothing in place now that's capable of deflecting an asteroid, at least that I know of.
We are moments away from impact.
Doomsday volcanoes.
It's the equivalent of having a 1 megaton bomb released once an hour for a month.
And doomsday global warming.
Climate change is inevitable.
Dear God, we're in trouble. Everybody get down!
Tonight we will learn what could happen.
We're really here talking about what may be the end of civilization as we know it.
And what we could do to make sure that day never arrives.
The future still remains in our hands.
Doomsday. The ends of the Earth could already be here. We exist at the whim of nature and hostage to our own capacity for violence. All the things we take for granted could vanish without warning, or with so little warning that ignorance might seem preferable. We have the power to save ourselves. But in order to use that power, we must first learn why we may need it. And science has mapped out 5 scenarios which could end life on Earth as we know it. The first is nuclear holocaust.
The damage in an SS-25 hitting Washington would be total devastation. So it would be our worst nightmare.
We have learned to live with one kind of doomsday for over 50 years. When the Cold War ended, we thought that the terror of nuclear holocaust had been put behind us. We were wrong.
The problem is that the theory we've been operating under in terms of our world relationships is one of mutually assured destruction. They launch at us, we launch at them. Maybe it did work in the 80s where you only had 2 superpowers, but you don't have that today. The Chinese have long-range missiles with nuclear warheads. The North Koreans have longer-range missiles that they're developing. The Indians and the Pakistans have nuclear capability. So now all of a sudden you have a world community that has the potential to wipe out other people with a single shot.
Located deep within the Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado is NORAD, the North American Airspace Defense Command. Accessible only through a blast-resistant tunnel, NORAD continuously scans the skies for any sign of impending missile attack.
We have large computer systems that analyze the information from all the sensors that we have in space and all around the world and determines whether or not an attack against North America is in progress.
Missile launch from southern Iraq.
The area at risk is reported as Saudi Arabia.
Sir,
If a missile strike is launched anywhere in the world, the officers in this subterranean command post will be the first to know.
OGS is reporting valid. It is non-threat. Sync assessment is not required.
But detecting an intercontinental ballistic missile is the easy part. Stopping it is a whole other matter.
Well, to defend against an ICBM, you have to realize that they are launched from one side of the world will proceed into space and then re-enter the atmosphere almost straight down over the target at tremendously high speeds, faster than a mile per second. So you have someone with a high-powered rifle at one end of a football field, and you're standing here on the goal line with a .22 rifle. And he shoots his bullet, and then you have to shoot that bullet with your bullet. So you have to be so accurate that you can actually hit a bullet with a bullet.
045. Sync assessment is required.
Missile launch.
We have no defense. As the chairman of the House National Security Committee on Research and Development Systems, I am embarrassed and ashamed to say that today we have no system that could take out an accidental or deliberate launch of a long-range ICBM.
And if we cannot defend ourselves against a nuclear attack that we can see coming, what chance do we have of protecting ourselves against one that is literally hand-delivered by terrorists?
The scariest weapon available to a terrorist is something the United States built using technology that's over 30 years old, and it's called a backpack nuke. It's a warhead that weighs about 58 pounds, and it's man-transportable in 2 backpacks by 2 soldiers or 2 terrorists. The key to building a nuclear weapon is not in developing the technical expertise to build a bomb, but in amassing enough fissile material such that when you put it together, it goes supercritical.
The key ingredient in a nuclear bomb is weapons-grade plutonium. More precious than diamonds, this is the artificial element essential for nuclear fission. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union emerged a dangerous black market for plutonium. If just the amount needed to fill a soda can fell into the wrong hands, it could be turned into a crude but effective nuclear device.
The potential for one of those caches of very sophisticated and very devastating material to be sold or to be stolen is very real.
Can I get everybody here, please, to step to the back of the car, please? Everybody, please step. Thank you. Everybody, please step to the back of the car. Thank you. I think something will be on there to help me.
The resulting explosion could wipe out the city of Washington, D.C. It is estimated that 375,000 people could lose their lives in the first 5 seconds. The loss of the country's top leadership would create chaos within the 3 branches of federal government, leaving the country unable to defend itself. A toxic cloud could spread over 5 states, killing thousands from the long-term effects of the radiation.
You know, we only have to look at the history of mankind to understand that there are some people who will use any means possible to achieve the desired outcome that they want in terms of dominating other people or affecting world policy.
The technology is available. The key to prevention is keeping the nuclear material out of the hands of these terrorists. Retired Russian General Alexander Lebed, one of today's most influential Russian politicians, acknowledges that something must be done.
It should be a mistake-proof system. A system where no one ever, not for any money, would be capable of getting a single nuclear charge. It must be an absolutely reliable system. And it is our common concern.
We don't want to generate extraordinary anxieties and panic, but to the extent that an informed public would pressure its representatives in Washington to take more seriously these threats, I think that would be immensely helpful.
For the past decade, we've been reducing the number of strategic nuclear weapons around the world. And it's my hopes and prayers that we will continue to reduce the number of these weapons of mass destruction.
We need to help the Russians make sure that they get tighter control, that they have the means to destroy these weapons, not just take them out and decommission them, but actually destroy them.
Some people who are in this business talk about situation management. I would much prefer preventing the situation in the first place rather than dealing with an incurable situation once it has arisen.
And prevention could mean our salvation.
This is about a realistic, common sense approach, holding the hands of the Russians, moving into a new era. An era that says we can no longer rely on mutual destruction, but now need to move to mutual protection.
When we come back, doomsday viruses that could kill millions.
And we're scared, really scared, that this is going to happen within the next year.
And killer asteroids.
We're really here talking about the end of civilization as we know it.
I think anytime you have an agent that kills a high proportion of individuals, you should have major concern.
One of the most serious threats to the human race comes from the smallest opponents. Doomsday viruses.
We see new bugs coming out all the time. And what is new are these really dangerous ones. It's one thing to get occasional pneumonia and fever and feel lousy. It's another thing if everyone who gets infected dies.
In Africa, we find the Ebola virus. Although its carrier is unknown, its effect on man is quite predictable.
The virus causes an abnormality in the blood clotting function of the body, and blood starts oozing out. So it's a blood and sex transmitted virus. Different than something like HIV with AIDS, though, that this one gets out of the body in large quantities because there's actually bleeding outside the body.
The Ebola virus lives in these African forests. So far, it has killed its human host so fast that every epidemic has been contained. But it could spread.
If you look at the amount of time that it takes to circumnavigate the globe now compared to what it was 100 years ago, it's just a setup for spreading infections. And that's really what I would call the making of the world village into a much smaller village than it used to be.
But there are killers every bit as dangerous as Ebola that are much closer to home.
We use disposable hospital gowns, essentially, to protect clothing. We wear 2 pairs of gloves, so if the outer glove is pricked, then hopefully the inner one will not be. And then this plastic face mask, so that if there's an accidental splash of urine or blood, it will not hit me in the face.
There's a very large difference between the Ebola virus, which gets into your body through the skin, and the hantavirus, which you breathe in. Hantavirus attacks the lung and destroys it. And when you can't breathe and exchange oxygen, you're going to die of the infection.
The hantavirus could become a doomsday virus. It is killed without warning in the southwestern United States. Now it is being studied with the hope that we can predict when and where the next outbreak will occur. It is a race against time.
To date, there's been close to 150 cases in North America since 1993, and roughly 50% of those 150 people have died of the virus.
This strain of hantavirus can be found in rural areas all over the country. No one knows why some become infected while others remain immune. Until we have unlocked these secrets, we are all at risk.
We need to understand what is this virus, how does it exist in nature, what are those things that trigger an outbreak, and to do that we have to study mice and the virus where they live in nature.
The Ebola and hantavirus are exotic killers that are currently confined to specific geographic regions. But ironically, the Doomsday virus that has scientists most frightened can be transmitted by the most innocent of carriers.
Influenza is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. That is an amazing statistic.
The flu is a familiar winter visitor, but certain strains of this virus can mutate and kill.
People think that it's a common cold, that it's just a few days in bed, but man, this virus kills people. It's transmitted person to person by coughing, laughing, and sneezing. And thus, the number of people who come down with the illness is far, far greater than from hantavirus or from Ebola.
One of these mutant strains of influenza could incubate in an ordinary farm animal. All that animal has to do is cough on an infant, and the virus could begin to spread.
And eventually you have a worldwide epidemic of flu. And that's happened over and over in history. And we're scared, really scared, that this is going to happen within the next year.
These mass influenza outbreaks seem to come every 30 years. Every strain is different, and some can be mass murderers. In 1918, one of the world's worst attacks had a huge effect on the outcome of World War I.
World War I stopped because so many French, English, American, and German soldiers, young 18-year-old men, died of influenza. There was no one left to put on the battlefield.
The world's population at that time was about 2 billion people. In a period of slightly over a year, about 1 billion people got infected. So about half the world's population became infected with the virus. 25 million people died.
Could it happen again? In the wrong place at the right time, it could.
If this virus appears in New York City and we don't have a vaccine, I would expect fully 40% of New Yorkers to come down with the flu, and I would expect thousands of them to die of the consequences.
With the spread of the killer flu, society as we know it could break down. There would be two classes of people, those who are infected and those who are not infected, those living in quarantine safety. When those groups collide, the ultimate kind of class warfare could break out.
Good evening, I am Lana Woods reporting live. They're rising, trying to get into this safe haven here.
There's going to be a lot of feeling of helplessness and powerlessness that people are going to have to deal with. Some people may be very emotionally distraught. Other people will be frantically running around trying to do something.
I think someone has been shot.
Merely disposing of the bodies would be an overwhelming problem, and that disposal could take place anywhere.
In modern-day society, it's rare for a worst-case scenario type of situation in an area like New York City. The fact of the matter is that we come in contact with so many different people every day that there's no real way to protect ourselves from those sorts of contacts.
But there is hope. Unlike the more exotic killers, there are vaccines for the flu. The difficulty is getting people to take the threats seriously.
I hate to be pessimistic, but with my 25 years in prevention now, I'm not convinced yet that at least the United States society is mature enough really to believe in prevention.
I think the risk happens when people forget that the diseases exist and figure that they've gone away. Until they've really established that they're gone, and I think someone has to at least be alert for the possibility that it's still sort of there smoldering in the background.
I feel very strongly that virtually every man, woman, and child in our country ought to get a flu shot each and every year because we could wipe out this disease.
When we come back, the threat of global warming.
That's a little bit scary.
And doomsday volcanoes.
a cube of rock 5 miles on a side, it was just blown straight up in the air.
It is called global warming, and by the mid-21st century, it could devastate coastal states like Florida, raising the temperature past normal averages. Huge hurricanes could ravage the state, and malaria, a disease that today is almost completely eradicated, might return with a vengeance, taxing medical and relief organizations to their limits. Long lines begin to build at local hospitals as demand for the last of the life-saving vaccine increases. The need for a cure is so great that widespread public panic could break out at any time. The world as we know it would cease to exist.
There is a vast majority of scientists that now agree that global warming is upon us, but that has not entered the consciousness of the average American.
We are all responsible. Every time we drive, open a refrigerator, consume anything manufactured by anyone, we contribute to the problem. And some believe that it is already too late.
Change is inevitable. The climate system is very sluggish. It takes decades to respond to what's already happened to it. And so we haven't seen all the warming that is yet to occur from what we've already put into the atmosphere. That's a little bit scary, but it's a fact of life.
In our lifetimes, these changes are going to become noticeable. In our children's lifetimes, they could become highly disruptive.
Global warming has been a highly debated environmental concern for decades. But today, most experts agree that the global warming phenomenon could be our most dangerous environmental problem.
I feel that people aren't paying very much attention to this issue. What it's going to take is some catastrophe that people will begin to notice and will begin to say, gee, this is really outside the realm of anything that we've ever experienced in our lifetimes.
The phenomenon of global warming begins with a process known as the greenhouse effect.
Certain gases that exist naturally in the atmosphere trap heat that would otherwise escape into space, like the glass of this greenhouse. The problem is that human activities like burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas are leading to a buildup of these greenhouse gases, and that inevitably will warm the Earth.
If you go to bed without a blanket on, then your body radiates heat and cools off. By putting a blanket on, you trap some of that heat that your body radiates. The only difference between that analogy and the Earth's climate is that in the morning we can throw those blankets off.
Scientists are attempting to predict climate changes over the next 50 to 100 years using high-tech computer models.
We start with the Earth's current climate, and we instantaneously double the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And what we can see is every place on the Earth is warmer at that time than the current climate. And it's just a matter of which places have warmed up a little and which places have warmed up a lot.
The models show that within the next century, certain parts of the Earth will have temperatures rising as much as 7 degrees. The areas of the map in red show the highest temperatures, areas that include much of the continental United States.
A few degrees Fahrenheit temperature change doesn't seem like very much. But 18,000 years ago, we were in the middle of the last ice age, and at that time, New York City was covered by 3 kilometers worth of ice. And the globally averaged temperature was only about 9 degrees colder at that time than it is today.
Experts warn that the effects of global warming will be obvious to the average person within 2 decades.
It'll become warmer, in some cases uncomfortably warm. Sea level will rise as glaciers melt and as ocean water expands. This will flood many heavily populated coastal areas.
It can start to contaminate the groundwater.
Your drinking water is becoming infiltrated with salt water.
It starts to increase the frequency and the intensity of hurricanes.
These storms happened anyway, but now, with the higher sea level, the flooding gets further inland. Certain diseases that are right now more or less restricted to the tropics are going to invade the northern areas, like the United States, for instance.
It would cause economic deprivation, severe dislocation, people's jobs would be lost.
Finally, we're going to see ecosystems like forests moving, the species going other places, and in many cases, some of these species will have no future at all. They'll simply disappear.
Is it too late? Is the Earth going to change to the point where it is better left uninhabited?
We can slow global warming if each of us will make individual conscious decisions of saving energy every day. Turn out the lights.
When you buy your next car, make it one with the highest possible fuel economy, because a car that burns less gasoline produces less carbon dioxide.
Insist that your utility company is scrubbing its smokestacks before it emits.
Next time you buy an appliance like a refrigerator or an air conditioner, buy the one where the sticker says it has the highest energy efficiency.
Look for alternative fuels. Encourage your congressman to vote for alternative fuels. That's what we can do today.
And if we start now, the future may be a very different place.
We're going to get there. We just have to start now. We can't wait.
When we come back, Doomsday asteroids.
If you imagine a stick of dynamite which is 1/2 mile across and then multiply it by a factor of 100.
And killer volcanoes.
To put the energy release in perspective, it's the equivalent of letting off the entire nuclear arsenal of the US.
This is something which is not science fiction, it's not X-Files stuff. We're really here talking about what may be the end of civilization as we know it.
Incoming!
On October 9th, 1992, millions of people living in the state of New York witnessed a visitor streaking over the night sky. This meteorite was estimated to weigh only 27 pounds, and when it fell to Earth, the damage was minimal. But there are other, far larger objects on a collision course with Earth, and they could have a far more devastating impact.
Most of the ones we've detected with telescopes to date are around about 1/2 mile to 1 mile in size. When they hit the Earth, they're really not slowed down by the atmosphere. They have around about 100 times more energy than the same mass of TNT. So if you imagine a stick of dynamite which is 1/2 mile across and then multiply it by a factor of 100, you can see that's a very, very powerful explosion indeed.
Just to demonstrate how little warning we may have at times is May of 1996, a fairly sizable asteroid went across the sky in less than 5 days.
This is no special effect. This is a near miss. A 1,000-foot wide asteroid that grazed the Earth's atmosphere. Had it impacted, it would have exploded with the force of 10 hydrogen bombs.
And we would not have had time to do anything that would have diverted this object in that amount of time.
The impact of a truly big asteroid would be catastrophic. For example, some believe that the object that smashed into the Yucatan Peninsula 65 million years ago was the event that wiped out the dinosaurs. The Gulf of Mexico may mark the crater that it left behind.
We are humbled when we try to explain the effects of a big impact.
To put it in some sort of context, the asteroid or comet which hit there would have been 10 or 20 miles across.
The hole that the comet dug before it was stopped was about 20 miles deep. It was converted instantly into white-hot vapor, as was 10 times its mass in the target. Then all this super-hot vapor came boiling out of the hole,
causing the global catastrophe which led to the end of the dinosaurs, and in fact the end of something like 60 to 70% of all the species alive on planet Earth at that time.
Could history repeat itself? The odds are it could. The only question is, when? And if this asteroid was on a final collision course, there would be nothing we could do.
Unconfirmed reports say that there is a looting now in progress somewhere between Lincoln Park and Lakeshore Drive, despite the military order to shoot on sight.
If we assume the meteorite's going to hit our city and we have minimal amount of time to prepare or to evacuate that city, there's still going to be a tremendous amount of the population that's going to try to evacuate. That's a given.
Inner city residents do not attempt to leave the city through the Eisenhower Express or Martin Luther King Drive. Both these roads are totally blocked. National Guard advisory gives no information to when these roads will be reopened.
There's going to be a lot of feeling of helplessness and powerlessness that people are going to have to deal with. The fact that they're not going to be able to do anything to prevent this.
I've just been informed that we are
If a mile-wide asteroid hit Chicago, the city would have been obliterated. The impact fireball probably would have been sufficient to blow out at the top of the atmosphere.
It would create debris that would crash down over Iowa and Wisconsin and Indiana. It would throw dust into the Earth's atmosphere, circling the globe, dimming the sunlight, ruining agriculture year-round, probably ending civilization as we know it.
Now, people quite often imagine that there are battalions of astronomers scouring the skies. Let me tell you, that's absolutely incorrect. The worldwide total is something like 20 or 25 people. That's the number of people that work in a typical fast food restaurant.
Well, NORAD has limited capability to see an incoming asteroid. Our systems would not pick that up until very close to the end game. And then you'd have only a few moments until collision with the Earth. And just as we have no defense against an intercontinental ballistic missile, we would have no weapon capable of going into space to intercept this particular object.
Destroying an incoming asteroid might only increase the danger.
Some people think you might want to blow up the asteroid or comet if you found one coming, but that would not be a good thing to do. You break it into a bunch of pieces. You wouldn't be able to predict where the pieces would go. It might rain down on the planet like buckshot and create more damage than if it were just to strike as one single piece.
The answer may not lie in destruction, but in detection and deflection. And the farther out in space, the less force we would need to steer the asteroid from its catastrophic course.
If we had warning, we could go into space. We could change its orbit slightly to get it to miss the Earth.
We've got to carry out the surveillance program and track these objects to determine, is an impact due soon?
And because this is a worldwide concern, we have proposed something that's called Space Guard, which is an international network of telescopes, and all of us attempting to together cover the sky.
Perhaps when that happens, we'll have a means of counteracting that asteroid before it hits the Earth.
We know how to tackle the problem, we know the magnitude of the problem, and in fact it's just another great challenge, I think, for the human race to take on its shoulders and say, hey, we can tackle this, we can do this.
When we return, a killer earthquake.
Richter scale kind of clips at about magnitude 8, but earthquakes can be 10, 100 times larger than that.
And doomsday volcanoes.
If I'd been standing here during the eruption, I would have been not only blown away, but burned and suffocated as well.
When most of us conjure up a catastrophe, earthquakes provide the pictures.
Oh my God! Holy cow! Where you go?
As deadly as these quakes were, none passed beyond 8 on the Richter scale. But that scale only graphs power we can measure.
Richter scale kind of clips at about magnitude 8, and simply because of the transmission properties of seismic waves.
Everybody, under your desk!
But earthquakes can be 10, 100 times larger than that. In fact, on a different scale, which supersedes the Richter scale, they go up to about 10.
Is everybody okay?
And it is one of those megaquakes that could trigger a doomsday event. A titanic volcanic eruption in the Sierra Nevada mountains, just 200 miles from Los Angeles. This event could destroy much of the state of California, and that is just the beginning.
If you try to put the energy release in perspective, it's the equivalent of having a 1 megaton bomb released once an hour for a month. A huge firework display that would produce clouds obliterating the sun for years, the sort of nuclear winter. In fact, very similar to letting off the entire nuclear arsenal of the US in a period of a month somewhere in the Midwest. Not a pleasant prospect.
A preview of this catastrophe happened only a few years ago in the northwestern United States.
We're located in the devastated area of Mount St. Helens, a forest of blown down trees pulverized by a blast on the morning of the 18th of May, 1980. If I'd been standing here during the eruption, I would have been not only blown away by the force of a hurricane cloud of hot ash moving at practically supersonic speed, but burned and suffocated as well.
Roger Billam works underground near Mammoth, California, watching for the signs that this eruption is imminent.
What this instrument tells us is whether the magma chamber is increasing in pressure or decreasing in pressure. Right now, we know it's increasing, and it's increasing by about a millimeter every 2 weeks or something like that.
Mammoth is one of the nation's most beautiful mountain retreats. But ironically, over 700,000 years ago, it was the epicenter of one of the most destructive volcanic eruptions ever.
You can think of it as a balloon that you're blowing up, and as with all balloons, eventually the strength of the rubber, or in this case the Earth's crust, will not be enough to contain the pressure within the balloon. And when that happens, it will blow up. And when this last blew up, it removed a cube of rock 5 miles on a side. It was just blown straight up in the air.
Roger Billam's job is waiting for the almost impossible to happen.
Extremely calamitous volcanic eruptions on the scale of what took place in Long Valley, California 730,000 years ago are rare events in terms of human timescales. They're virtually non-existent, nothing that we should lose sleep over.
We're more likely to be hit by a meteorite walking back to our car than this thing blowing. On the other hand, it could happen.
Although there's no way to prevent these natural disasters, we can prepare for the immediate aftermath.
Our whole strategy is try to get individual residents prepared, know what to do when the earth starts shaking, look around you immediately afterwards, and then begin to do the right thing.
We need to understand that in America, a disaster can occur anytime, any place, any city, any town. And every one of those towns have to have some degree of training and have to have a total degree of support in terms of available resources.
The best case scenario is that Roger Billum is waiting for something that will never happen.
The worst case scenario is that you have a reordering of top dog. Maybe man won't come out too well.
Doomsday, what can we do? We'll be right back. Is our destiny out of our hands? Could Doomsday happen on any day?
There are going to be things occur that we can't stop. What we have to have are the most sophisticated systems available to mankind to predict approximately when and where that disaster will occur. Whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a tsunami, whether it's a flood, or whether it's a meteorite coming into one of our cities.
But in the meantime, you can rest assured that as long as there's a nuclear threat to North America, that NORAD and U.S. Space Command will spend every second of every day monitoring the entire surface of the Earth and space for any possible attack.
The same principles of science that could hasten Doomsday might also keep it from ever dawning. But scientists need their tools.
It's rather like buying a burglar alarm system and having the dog chew the cable to the plug and you're not fixing it. Or it's like buying a new car and leaving it to rust. You just don't do that sort of thing. It doesn't make sense.
I just don't understand why people don't take advantage of a cheap, safe, and effective vaccine that will keep them from getting flu, spending $100 to go see a doctor like me, or ending up in the hospital and dying. I don't get it. I don't understand that dynamic.
The threat of Doomsday should unite mankind as never before. But we should not have to wait until the threat becomes reality.
I think the media can play a tremendous role in trying to educate the community about disasters and let them know that even in the face of the most profound adversity, there's certain things you can do to help yourself and help your community recover.
Life has been here on this planet for 3.5 billion years, and many, many times there have been extinction events. But now, at long last, a species has evolved which is smart enough and has the technology to actually intercede and make sure that these things don't happen again. We're that species, and I think we've really got to get out there and do something about it.
Doomsday or the dawn of a new day? The choice is ours.
This doesn't have to happen. Starting today, we can all go out and start making changes in our own lives that'll make a big difference to the future.
Om lidt kan du blandt andre følge en soldat, der får en afsikret granat skudt ind i sin arm. Se det og meget mere ske lige om lidt.